Anyone can unmute or text in the chat and indicate that I'm loud and clear. Anyone ready? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pinkton. Okay, all right. So we are incredibly fortunate to have our trainer available. She's already around. She's one of Kenya's finest. As you're going to see, I'm only going to go through a little bit of her CV and expertise so that you guys can have full confidence that she's one of the best, and you guys can expect the best, right? I'll try to be very brief because she's got quite a CV. So, okay, I'll begin with the latter, with 2024, right? So she was DCA at KUDC 2 in 2024, Masuja 12 in 2024. If you guys don't notice, or if some of you guys don't know some of these tournaments, it is because they are based in Kenya and other countries, really, right? So all over Africa and beyond. Yeah. So she was CAP at Ubuntu 4 in 2024, then CAP in Mbogodo 2023. I hope I read that right. Then DCA in KUDC 2023, CAP Ikenga 2023, CAP 2 Lowa 2023, CAP Andil 2023, CAP for Insurance Debates 2022, CAP Ubuntu 2022, CAP Mashuja 7 2022, and the 8th best judge at African Interversities 2025, the 2nd best judge at Ubuntu 2 2023, the 2nd best judge at Ikenga 2022, and quarter finalist at PIUDC. So these are personal speaking, achievements, right? Second top speaker at Royal Rhetorics Anniversary, Women's Open 2024, semi-finalist Monrovia Opens 2024, and semi-finalist Summer Wars 2024, finalist at Royal Rhetorics Women's Open 2023, and PIUDC quarterfinalist for 2022. Right, like I told you guys, it's quite the CV, right? So buckle up, everybody. Let's get ready for the session. Like I've said, she's already on the call. It is at this very moment that, without further ado, I'm going to invite Perez to really take the floor. We are so excited to have you. Please, the floor is yours. Here.
Here, and thank you so much for that sterling introduction. I want to acknowledge the presence of each and every person here, and I intend that the objective of this meeting is that we are all going to get out while we have understood what is taken into consideration when we are speaking about judging criteria and speech evaluation, especially in debate. I'm majorly going to tackle the WSDC part because most of the people tackle British parliamentary, but you need to understand that number one, WSDC most of the time forms the foundation of debating per se. That is to say that you do not underscore the role that those little children are doing in a debate room. Whenever they open their mouth, to speak, and whatever they are saying, you need to encourage them. So at any point that we are probably adjudicating around, or we are adjudicating with you in a room, and I see you probably looking down on a child or even probably trying to demotivate them, that is to say that you give them feedback in a very harsh tone, I might probably call you out or give you a low score. Why is that the case? Because listen, these children are the ones who are going to come to replace us in future. We are building a future for them. And debate is something that will assist them to build their self-esteem. For some of them, they probably are good in their debate clubs or societies back in school, or debate is the only place that they get as a club or an organization where they can unwind. So when they come to a competition, maybe it is a good environment far away from the harsh textbooks or the education that they are having. So it is imperative that as judges, we have a kind of homely environment, a welcoming environment for those particular children who are doing the WSDC. That is number one. Secondly, when you are judging WSDC, you understand that you're having team proposition and team opposition, but it is usually given as team affirmative and team negative. And the standard speaking time is usually 8 minutes, but sometimes whenever we are judging in some local tournaments, you find that because of lack of time, most especially, is that sometimes you're told 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, unless maybe it's a national where we try to create time for the speakers to exhaust their 8 minutes, or maybe if it is a trials. So you have to look at who's the first speaker, second speaker, third speaker, who is doing the reply speech also. So you have to look at the role of the first speaker. A basic description of the role of the first speaker, whether or not they are in team affirmative or whether they are in team negative, is that number one, the first speakers are supposed to tell us what the motion is all about. They are going to give us a description that this is what the motion is speaking about. These are the new words or the key terms of the motion, and this is how we really need to address it at that point in time. They are also going to give you a layout of this is how my team is going to give these particular points. So they can tell you we're going to speak up maybe about disadvantages or like the effects of maybe smoking in a motion, like this house would ban smoking and all that. They are also going to tell you their characterization based on the status quo. That you see, for example, in a world without smoking, this is what we prefer compared to maybe what is the status quo and all that. They're also going to try to identify what the problem is and tell you that because of these particular problems, this is what we are going to solve, or this is our objective in this particular debate, and maybe give you an overview about some of the arguments that they are going to do. They could also flag about some of the arguments that team negative or or team opposition are probably going to say. So they can start off by telling you that, chair, this debate is all about this and this. Anyone who speaks beyond this and this and this then is out of the debate at that point in time. Or, chair, if opposition comes in to say this, then this is our model, which has already mitigated A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So that is something you need to get from the first speaker. Unlike what I have done, I haven't begun by giving you a layout of what I'm going to speak about. I've just hit the nail on the head by just beginning, which is a very bad way of doing a presentation. But the first speaker is going to give you in the debate a good presentation of what they're going to do. So you're going to be able to understand that the first speaker is going to do this, the second speaker is going to do this, and the third speaker is going to do this and this and this. One thing I like about WSDC speakers is that whenever the speakers tell you that their partner is going to do this and this and this, they usually deliver. Unlike in British parliamentary, where the speaker would say, I will take your point of information, or we are going to do this and this, but then they end up not taking your point of information, or they just end up circumnavigating around a certain argument, and really they don't say whatever the argument was, or they don't probably deliver whatever they tell you. So that is something you need to acknowledge for the WSDC style. In team negative, what happens is that the opposition team is probably going to, a new thing that they would probably do is, because in proposition they usually preempt, in opposition they would begin by rebuttals first of all. So the first speaker in team opposition is going to begin by rebuttals to a certain point in time, and most especially if we are doing at this household, or we are doing a certain motion where an actor has been framed in a certain way. So you realize that it is usually good for the opposition first speaker to begin a bit by doing a bit of rebuttals to kind of give us a contextualization of what they think the motion is all about. Because whenever you're a judge, you always have a clean sheet of paper or just a clean exercise book, and you actually probably take to word everything that the first proposition speaker has already spoken about. So by the time the first negative speaker is speaking, you want to understand, why are you Why are you probably disagreeing with them on this particular matter? Why should probably the actor United States not be framed like this? Why should Russia probably not be framed as a malevolent dictatorial country or something of the sort? So you need to understand that from the opposition speaker, and they're mostly going to give you that, and then compare it to whatever argument they're bringing in on the table, and then give you a layout of whatever you expect from them, and then give you a bit of substantive argumentation that they have at that point in time. And then for the second speakers on both sides would generally begin by rebuttals, probably, or challenging some kind of questionable definition. And for some of the bright second speakers, they usually begin by solving the contention that has already occurred or the clash between the first speakers, either in proposition or team negative. So they're going to tell you that, for example, there was a clash on the definition of the United States of America and all that. So they would come in with new examples and give you that just to set the record straight, and then continue with whatever their partner promised that they're going to do, and also probably add even new argumentation or new examples after doing the rebuttals and all that. They would also, at a certain point in time, try to do a bit of preemption also, trying to say that if the second opposition speaker comes in to say this and this is what we are saying and all that. And then they call it a day. And then the second opposition speaker comes, does almost the same role, only that they are in the opposition side. They would do rebuttals again. They would give definitions if required, and probably challenge certain problematic definitions. And they would also sometimes introduce their own argumentation beyond that of which the first opposition speaker or the first negative speaker had promised the chair that they would deliver. For the third speakers, and something that before I wind up about second speakers is that for the second speakers, you normally have to introduce new matter. Most of the new matter, most of the new examples, let it come from you, especially the analysis and most of the intuition pumps, let them come from you. Why am I saying this? Let us go to the third speaker. And the role of the third speakers on both ends is being a whip. Whenever you are a whip, it means that you're supposed to summarize the debate. It means that at any point in time, somebody is entering the room and we are having a debate maybe between St. Mary's probably and any other school. Maybe we are supposed to understand that the St. Mary's RIP is saying that their first proposition speaker said this and this, followed by what the second speaker said, and they're probably using their arguments to rebut this other school and all that. And like the whips are usually having a very vibrant, like they usually make the debate very vibrant. They usually have a vibrant time because what the bulk of work is that they organize the form of argumentation that has been given by the first and second speaker on both of their sides, and they use that as a form of engagement to what the other speakers have said and a form of like weighing. So when you do not receive weighing from the first speakers, you would most probably get it from the third speakers. So the third speakers are going to do a bit of weighing. By weighing, I mean that they are going to like tell you between A and B, I think, chair, you need to prioritize this and this, because given that my partner said this and this, in a world where you have this and this, versus a world where probably you do not have smoking, these are the likelihood impact. But then again, we tend to think we maximize utility, and they're going to tell you how they maximize utility. They will not just throw buzzwords and all that, especially for the good WSDC speakers. They usually try very hard not to be fraudulent. That is to say that they just don't throw buzzwords. They explain word for word whatever they're trying to say. So you'd find that majority of these particular speakers are going to end up even describing probably what is a child, what is how the United States of America works and everything, even some of the things that are just obvious. So they're going to explain to you how these things work. Something you also need to note is that the whips are just limited to summarizing maybe and doing the rebuttals. They cannot give in new argumentation or new analysis. And what counts for new argumentation or new analysis? And this is why I was saying at a certain point, it is preferred that either the first opposition speaker So the second speaker comes in with a bit of intuition, palms, and all those things, because we always have scenarios where certain judges, especially when you're a panel, some judges would not take it kindly if the whips begin having a bit of intuition, palms, and a bit of very new examples that begin to look as if you're trying to bring or front in an argumentation. So the chairs might flag you down, or the panel might flag you down at that point in time. So it is usually advisable that the third speakers always come in doing the rebuttals, maybe, and also doing those particular engagements. At a point in time that they want to add a new example, it would be, for example, that the second opposition speaker said something, or the second negative speaker said something. Notice at this point, there is no room for the second affirmative speaker or the first affirmative speaker to respond. Therefore, it is the mandate of the third proposition speaker to respond to what the second negative speaker had said. And so this is where maybe we can say this is not new material, but it is your immediate role. Because apart from the first speaker affirmative or proposition, the role of every other speaker is to at least begin by rebuttals before you do any other thing. So that is for the third proposition speaker, and also for the third negative or opposition speaker. They have almost similar roles. So none of them is supposed to introduce a new argumentation. The only kind of argumentation which is probably a bit, let's not say new, but is welcomed and might not be flagged as new, is at a point in time the most immediate speaker that has spoken after them. And then for the reply speeches, sometimes teams usually try to be very bright or very conniving. They try to bring in rebuttals in the reply speeches. And remember that it is the opposition reply speech immediately after the third opposition, and then the reply speech of proposition is the last one. What happens at that point in time is that at that point, you're only supposed to give us, it is more of a selling argumentation why opposition is winning, why proposition is winning. You do not introduce rebuttals. You do not start doing a lot of engagement. You only tie it by telling us, we have given you this as our product. It is the best because it solves this particular thing. Therefore, we tend to think that in a world with this and this and this, where you have minimum problems and you want this particular solution, it is probably a good thing or a good move where you buy our argumentation, unlike a world where this and this and this, where this is probably not solved. So you can probably employ a use of a clash as a form of a tipping point or a selling point, that maybe you've solved this particular clash. You're the only team that took rebuttals. You're the only team that maybe did not shy from maybe taking POIs. Maybe you took 5 or 6 POIs. At that point, you are very charitable. So you use that as a selling point. Why do all these things count as a form of judging criteria? The very first thing that we need to do is that we need to understand at a point in time that speakers do not perform their roles, it becomes problematic whenever you're giving the scores. So whenever you're marking the scores, when the first proposition speaker or first affirmative speaker did not define for you the motion and made the debate very problematic, making maybe the opposition to fly away with so many easy things or just very problematic argumentation, it gives a hard time for the other speakers to probably convince you that proposition is winning. Unless maybe the second affirmative speaker does extensive damage control, then maybe, as I know judges and most of the people I sit with in the panel, it becomes difficult for them to buy into that. Also, at a Consider that at that point in time, I am going to award opposition for that win over there. But even secondly, there are usually scenarios where this particular speaker has decided to inverse their roles. So you find that number one, the speaker who was the third speaker is the one giving in extensive argumentation. But the second speakers are doing the rebuttals. The first speaker was probably okay, and their content is very much okay. Regardless of whether they've inversed the roles, the content is okay. They have delivered on the content. So they've broken our first presumption. But whereas in opposition, all the speakers are sticking to their speaker roles, but at that point in time, you're not getting what is opposition or negative trying to pass across. I really do not get what they are standing on this patterns on this debate. They are really not trying to convince you why they should take the win. At that point, it is good if you give proposition the win regardless, but explain if it is an open round why you gave proposition the win. That in as much as there was some inversion of roles or some failure of sticking to speaker roles, proposition probably got the bone of like contention in the debate, and they really addressed the motion well. Whereas if you look at opposition, they did not do that thing and did not go to a certain extent of probably convincing you at that point in time. But again, when it comes to the speaker's cause, you're supposed to penalize those who invest the speaker roles. So it could be a bench win, let's say a team win. So proposition has won. First speaker probably stuck to their role, so give them the good speaker points based on the speaker range that you're using. When you use the WSDC, you understand that 75 is like the very, very good, like you're like Albert Einstein at that point in time. So that is like you're very an extreme speaker who really speaks so well, and you would really qualify to be the winner at WSDC. So we usually say at that point, most of the good debates, especially in round one, probably usually begin from around the highest could probably be 72 there to 73 most of the time. In 74 and 75, you usually give by the time you're done with the round three and round four, at least there almost everyone now understands the role that they are doing at that point in time. You give a speaker a 64 sometimes or a 67, given that maybe the mode of delivery was poor, number one, or maybe this speaker was just giving in one liner argumentation, did not do extensive analysis at that point in time, or this speaker was probably doing what you call a rhetoric speech. So at this point in time, you're giving out a debate, and in a debate, you're usually supposed to explain to the panel why probably I'm going to ban alcohol from side proposition, maybe in East Africa or maybe in Uganda or Kenya, or why maybe we're supposed to sue people who have arrested opposition leaders in East Africa and all that. At that point in time, I'm supposed to give you the explanation why. But then you find for these particular speakers, they come in and tell you, Chair, is it not a bad thing that our human rights are being trampled upon? What happens then to the future? So most of their argumentation going ahead is that they always like try to front in a certain argumentation or a statement using rhetoric speeches. That is an average form of delivering a speech, which becomes problematic because the speaker is not analyzing extensively. Because if they tell you that your human rights are being infringed upon, then you need to understand why. Are all prisoners supposed to have equal rights? Are all prisoners supposed to be given an opportunity to vote? Are prisoners probably not supposed to be beaten? Are they supposed to be allowed maybe room to visit their families or have conjugal rights and all that? They're supposed to explicitly, and the word is explicitly explained to you, and that is it. So you find that at this point in time, if there was a reversal of roles, but the other team explicitly explained, it is okay. The third speaker could probably get a lesser mark while the other speakers are getting higher marks, but then it is a proposition win while the opposition loses at that point in time. So in judging criteria, you need to consider the speaker roles. Did the first affirmative stick to their role? Did the second affirmative stick to their role? Did the third affirmative stick to their role? What happened in the reply speech again? Because in the reply speech, also when you're giving 34, 35, or 37 and 40, it all boils down to what their rebuttals in this particular speech. So one way I can tell you that you can give a good reply speech is usually in WSDC, it's probably 40, but in a normal or a local tournament, sometimes it is usually around 36. If it is very high, it's around 37. What happens at that point in time is that this particular reply speech is more of a good selling speech. What would make you buy Blue Band instead of probably buying peanut butter? And if those two brands have been presented to you, what would make you buy Blue Band instead of peanut butter? So that is the question you could probably ask yourself at a point in time that somebody is giving you a reply speech. Is it when they come in attacking the other person instead of telling you the good that they have done in that debate? They can probably even tell you, just vote for us or give us the first because we stuck to our roles. We spoke at exactly 8 minutes and 15 seconds. We were the only ones who were polite in the room. We were the only ones who took POI. So you always, as a person who is going to the supermarket or trying to buy a product, you always want to know the benefits of this particular product, probably to you. Not that this company made 80,000 sales and that their opponent is a bad person. That is like the psychology of adjudicating most of the time, and why certain reply speeches, even when you are going to speak at that point in time, you have to understand that that is what we consider. So we also consider, did the other negative also fulfill their roles in this particular speaker schools, such in their speaker roles, such that now we understand the content based on whatever was given on these particular roles. So we look at that, number one. Secondly, we also look at, in the judging criteria, we look at the motion type. So in the motion type, this is what we are going to look at, the bulk content. So content stroke the motion type. It is through the motion type that you're going to get the content that is supposed to be delivered in that particular debate. So if it is at this household motion, you expect that the speakers are going to front a policy, especially from team proposition or team affirmative. Or in team opposition, they could give in a counter policy, but even then, sometimes it is better that they don't give a counter policy, because if they give a counter policy, they will have to explain why the counter policy is good. But even secondly, it has got to be very cheaper compared to what proposition is proposing. It's got to be implemented with very less money and a very easier way, less resources that people have access to, such that their counter policy can probably be accepted in the debate. But even then, you expect that this particular model or policy is a reasonable or a realistic one that probably incorporates whatever is happening in the status quo, or would try to address what is happening in the status quo, because debate does not happen in a bubble. Sometimes teams could probably set in a policy or a model, and this usually happens especially in proposition, because when you're training students or kids, usually tell the children you're supposed to give in a model or give in a policy, because this is a policy motion. In this house will or this house would, some of them are policies, and we're going to look at the different types of motion so that you don't penalize the kids unfairly. So you find that not OG, but proposition is expected to give a model. So at that point in time when they're supposed to give a model, because they've been conditioned like that, some of the models that they give are very unrealistic one, or sometimes it uses a lot of money, or sometimes it's just a model that is self-defeating, or it shoots their case in the foot. Because when opposition comes in at that point in time, when they bring the rebuttals or the engagement, they start speaking about probably the money or like the environment. Although sometimes we usually say that just let proposition set regardless of the environment, but sometimes you also need to understand, are the sick going to be affected at that point in time? What happens probably if it's about banning all drugs? If you're banning all drugs, you need to explain how those people who have terminal illness, how are they going to access some of the drugs that are needed at that point in time? Because you've banned all drugs, and we have people who cannot survive without taking their drugs every day. So how are you going to address certain things? So your motion, the fiat of the debate, does not make you like insolvable from answering those pertinent questions. So your model should tell us that maybe this is how the sick are going to be addressed. This is how those who have terminal illnesses or have gone through chemotherapy are going to do this and this, or dialysis. This is how we assist them at this point in time. So you try to at least give us that particular solution, even if you've already set the model. For opposition, the main at that point in time, if they're not banning all drugs, they need to tell us why at that point in time. They could also propose a counter model instead of doing that. Maybe judge or adjudicate, judge harshly, that is, take them to the court of law, and probably prosecute harshly those found in possession of cocaine or cannabis sativa and all those things at that point in time. So the main bone of contention here would be to weigh between the models given. So it is up to now the teams to now explain to you why you need to buy their model, or maybe why the counterfactual of opposition does not work, and all these things. So they're going to explain that to you. So if it is a policy motion, you are required to have a policy, especially from proposition teams at that point in time. So you always are looking at the content. So did they give in a policy? Yes, they gave in a policy. So it is probably justified for them to win. But even then, did they do extensive analysis of the argumentation? By extensive analysis, I mean we do not want one liner arguments from the children. We are training the children to be good or exemplary debaters more than us. So we do not want them to have one liner argumentation. By this, it means that even though proposition brought in a model, but then again, they say that they are going to ban drugs just because probably they tell you that we live in a society where the youths are now addicted to all drugs. People are even misusing antibiotics and all that. So it is a hazard, it is a human hazard. And then they stop there, and then probably give on other argument, other statements, and it is just probably one liner. While opposition, in as much as probably they do not have a counter model or a counter policy, they stick to the status quo and say we want how the status quo is. where all drugs are not banned, but you have regulations and everything. At a point in time, somebody is found with possession of bang, they are probably persecuted in court and all those things. Or probably you see that the president or maybe the cabinet secretaries or some of the ministers taking those ships or those cars which have drugs in them and banning them like that. And that is the status quo. So they try to defend the status quo, and they try to say how the status quo is probably better than all that, and they really try to analyze their points. I think at that point in time, you are now looking at analysis, because in analysis is where you get extensive of the content. My content is just not about me telling you that me having drugs, or we are banning drugs because it is a human hazard, or we are banning it because the pharmaceutical industry has become very capitalistic, so we want to regulate it. And then I continue just giving you one-liner statements like that without telling you how has the pharmaceutical industry become capitalistic, one. But even secondly, how has the pharmaceutical industry impacted how the society views drugs? Do we have a black market for drugs? Do we have substandard drugs? What happens when somebody goes to a public hospital or a private hospital? So you find that sometimes even the over-the-counter drugs become problematic, because because now when people keep on purchasing these drugs, they become hooked on them. That's why you find that most of the people who buy antibiotics to like kind of heal a certain disease, maybe the pharmacist here can tell us more, is that they kind of keep on getting hooked, because maybe there's a certain thing found in that drug, which maybe it is substandard, that is making them to probably get hooked on that drug. The disease they have or the virus is not getting healed, but then they still want to buy that drug. So that is something you want to solve. So you need to explicitly, by explicitly I mean the speaker should tell you that you heard it from the speaker's mouth and you wrote it. Because we don't want a scenario where students or the children are coming to equity and saying that our judge interpreted the points for us or for the other team. Because these students, in as much as they want the first or maybe they want the second or to defend the country in the national team, they are always bright, they know, and sometimes they're not going to want you as their judge, because they're going to say you always interpret the motion for them. So that would mean that you're becoming a whip judge, which is a very bad thing. So they explicitly need to tell you, and that is why I am saying the extensive analysis thing is what is going to give opposition over proposition at this point in time, and you need to explain it to them when you're giving oral adjudication. That in as much as you came in with a model, because let me tell you, for most of the students, they will come at you and tell you, chair or panel in our room, why did you give us second, yet we came with the model and we were proposition? And they really get angry. It really angers them. So you must explain to them, in as much as you gave a policy, but it goes beyond that. Look at your argumentation. In as much as you gave this statement, but I need to get the why. Why, in as much as the pharmaceutical industry is becoming capitalistic, do you want to regulate it? You do not tell me that. So do they tell you why it has become capitalistic, how they're going to regulate it? Do they answer those questions? And sometimes when speakers speak, try and ask yourself, why? Why? So if they tell you they're banning drugs because it is a human hazard and all that, why is it a human hazard? Notice I've just thrown in a buzzword, human hazard. Because instead of saying it is dangerous, I use hazard. And it really looks like a very catchy word. It is like me just saying it is self-actualization, or we are maximizing utility. But why are you maximizing utility? How are you maximizing utility? How is it self-actualization? This is what I mean by saying that that speaker did extensive analysis. They kind of refrained from giving you one-liner statements, so they went deeper, and through that you were able to get a bit of the content, which kind of impacted the scope of the debate through that. So the argumentation was a bit of extensive, hence the extensive analysis of that. So there's some bulk in their argumentation. And notice that most of the teams that go deep like that, they answer the questions why, they answer the question how, they answer the question probably to what extent, why should we prioritize this? Is this urgent at that point in time? These teams usually have a way of making the debate to tip between the class should probably be in that debate. Is it an urgent thing or is it not an urgent thing? Should we prioritize A over B? Should we prioritize the feelings of the citizens vis-a-vis maybe the feelings of maybe the government when they want to raise the GDP and all that? So that is something that will assist you, and like you really need to acknowledge and appreciate teams who go really to extensive analysis, because now they give some kind of bulk to the debate, and sometimes they kind of like give you some good focus that this is what you need to prioritize as a judge, compared to speakers who just give you one-liner statements, because they make it very problematic for you to judge. Because now, are you going to prioritize accountability? Are you going to prioritize self-actualization? Are you going to prioritize, say, maybe the country becoming capitalistic over becoming humane? And yet they do not even tell you what you need to prioritize. All these problems are solved when they do extensive analysis, and you can also employ this in your oral adjudication. Tell them the reason why you've probably failed to do this and this when they come to you for personal feedback is because I feel when you only do one-liner statements or you do not do extensive analysis, you do not answer this. So the panel is conflicted as to whether to prioritize capitalism over humanity. In as much as debate is liberal, and they tell us you are supposed to prioritize principles. So that would mean we prioritize diversity, one. We prioritize things to do with accountability and transparency. But then again, if a speaker does not explicitly tell you that, okay, chair, prioritize A, B, C, and D, how are you supposed to do it? It is for you to choose for yourself. So unless the speakers also tell you that you prioritize this over this, it is up to you to choose for yourself as an average intelligent voter, or as the judge who feels this is the bone of the debate. This is how the debate has been resolved to this particular extent. This is what I have understood. So that is the content extensive analysis. When we go to THBT, in THBT, it is this house believes that. In THBT, we usually have forms of the way this motion appears. It appears in two forms. So you have THBT X should do Y, which counts as a policy debate. And then you have the THBT maybe should do this and this and this. That should at a certain point in time could probably also be a policy. Let me just type it in the message. What is a judge supposed to do in a room when cases run as parallel? Let me just finish with the motions and then I answer this. So you have the motions in THBT which count as policy most of the time. But sometimes if teams don't, if there's a unilateral agreement or a silent agreement between teams, and they don't call each other for lack of a model, then you do not need to penalize them. Judge the debate the way it is. So if you have THBT, X should do Y, or THBT, yeah, it's just the same. THBT, X should, yeah, X should do this and this. These are policy debates, or a policy motion. This is a policy motion. Proposition is supposed to come up with a policy. But most of the time, excuse me for that, but most of the time, there is usually a silent agreement, because whenever you're having certain types of motions like this, it is usually very heavy on government, such that they don't even know where to start. And then for opposition, they usually do not really want to call out their proposition, because even them, they've not understood the motion. So they feel like, and most of the time, these motions are usually given in the out rounds. So you find that everyone at that point has maybe a silent agreement, take us out or do this and this and this. So they would probably not call each other out and all that. I hope I'm not breaking. I hope I'm not breaking at anyone's point. So whenever you have teams having a silent agreement between themselves, or you see no one calling out the other person for not giving in a policy, just judge the debate the way it took place. Thank you. You can hear me clearly. And then if you have THBT, this house believes that this house believes that feminism, radical feminism, maybe radical feminism has done more harm than good. So if you have this house believes that radical feminism has done more harm than good, this is an actual THBT motion where teams are supposed to generally, most of the time, just give us a value kind of debate. So you're kind of giving us a value debate where you're evaluating why radical feminism has done more harm than good. Radical feminism could be a good thing and there are two ways that this debate could take place. In some of the very advanced rooms, then you're having Nelson, could you try and leave the call and then come back if I am breaking on your end? So when you're having this house believes that radical feminism has done more harm than good, there are two ways that this debate could take place. So in very advanced rooms, the actual way that this debate should be approached at this point is that you're not supposed to take radical feminism as a bad thing. It is a good thing, but you're just evaluating that to the extent that it has existed like this and like this, or that this is how the actors have digested it, then it brings about this particular harm. And we tend to think that maybe the cultural feminists or people who live in third world countries might not be able to reconcile their beliefs to it. Whereas in probably opposition, they are saying that the way it has existed like this and like this, maybe it has done more good because we now see a lot of non-governmental organizations or a lot of feminist movements getting up to set the record straight and all that and the implications. So the clashes are usually on the implications and maybe if this implication has done more good than harm. So maybe if maybe having a lot of members to proposition could be a harm than a good, because those lots of members get to mean that this movement is being classified as a cult or being grouped as a cult, especially in marginalizing areas in third world countries or developing countries. So in our reserved areas, for example. So that would mean that your sisters, your mothers, your aunties are being targeted, or even your girlfriends at that point in time. So it does more harm at that point. Or maybe because of those large members, people expect them to now do social responsibility, that we now do not give you money. So at this point in time, you're supposed to do something to the community. Good things to proposition could also be a harm because it is probably making or impacting the movement or some of the actors in a bad way. I would give you an example of where we were having a certain motion in Kenya where non NGOs, so it was a motion on whether NGOs, the existence of a lot of NGOs in marginalized areas in the Republic of Kenya has done more harm than good. So one of the speakers said that the existence of these NGOs has brought in a lot of boreholes and wells, which means that people in those local areas or back in the rural areas can access water. This is a harm. It is a bad thing. And now we were wondering, why is accessing water or having easier access to water a bad thing? Because remember, in debate, when you have easier access to water, that's a good thing. But now in these motions, speakers will go on to explain to you, for example, that based on the cultural context, if snakes can be able to attack your home because there's a well nearby, or there's a borehole nearby, or like you're having gender-based violence because women cannot run away to probably say that they're going to fetch water, so cannot escape being beaten and all that, then it is probably a harm at that point in time. So sometimes good things become a harm, and that is what these THBT motions usually seek to explain. I'm trying to give you how I understand it,
beyond what the judging manual or the criteria usually says, because when speakers are debating, sometimes you need to give them feedback based on how you understand that motion or how they debated that particular motion. So that THBT is a very actual THBT motion that is supposed to be adjudicated like that. In the second way that this debate can take place, the one I've written on the chat space is this: you can go to certain rooms and proposition says radical feminism has done more harm than good, and they start attacking radical feminism. So when you're in that room, I will not say that that is a substandard room, but you probably have an idea from where these speakers are coming from. They do not know, because there are certain strategies and tactics that you're supposed to employ whenever you're approaching these motions. Notice, if you attack radical feminism at that point and say it is bad, there's a certain way that you're going to make certain arguments and they're going to be self-defeating. There was a motion I judged, I think it was last week, but one, and it was all about the government being an actor, or the government being the one, I think, to stop corruption and all that, to oversee corruption, or to be the one to nationalize the carbon credits or carbon dating companies and all that. So the opposition, or the opposition in this particular debate, decided to attack the government and put the government as corrupt. And then as they went on, they realized that on their side, in as much as the government is corrupt, they still need the government to probably buy in. The way the motion was worded, the opposition needed the government to still come in and buy those carbon credit companies. So at that point, you realize you've shot yourself in the foot. And this is what happens when speakers handle these motions in the second way. If you believe that something has done more harm than good, try to look at the implications of that thing, try to attack its implications, but its existence, probably you can consent it is a good thing, but then maybe its implications could be bad. It is just like having humans on earth is a good thing, but having them existing a lot might not be a good thing, because they produce a lot of carbon footprints or carbon credits at that point in time. The third type of motion you have is the actor motion, where you have this house as A would do B. At this point in time, also, the proposition is supposed to give you a policy. And then they're supposed to also tell you the incentives of the actor A to probably do B. Because if it is the United States of America would stop funding Ukraine, for example, even though it might not really be a balanced motion, the CS might tell us how to word it. But if this house as US would stop funding Ukraine, you would want to tell us who is the United States, why would they want to stop funding Ukraine, how are they going to do this and this and this. So sometimes argumentations could start, or the clash could become, because of the statement that was said in the policy of proposition. Then opposition has probably an allowance to fiat something else, because sometimes you find that teams could probably front their model in such a way that United States would really go ballistic to Ukraine, and like they paint it in such a way that they would probably arrest Zelensky. Those extreme forms. So you realize, if teams go to the extreme, there's a certain way they allow for opposition to fiat certain things, in as much as proposition was probably protected by assuming feasibility and all those particular things. The other motions are usually this house prefers A to B. So if it is this house prefers A to B, if proposition, if the motion is just worded, TH prefers A to B. So proposition prefers A to B. So it means opposition is preferring B to A. No team should come in to tell you they prefer both. Let me just type that down, because that one I've also, TH prefers A to B. It means that affirmative is preferring A, opposition is preferring B. there is nothing like we prefer both or let us have a middle ground. If a certain team comes in and that is their stance, then I think the other team should probably be the one winning if their content is okay. And at this point, also look at the stance of the team. Because in a TH prefer motion, the stances are very clear. Proposition is to prefer A, opposition is to prefer B. If opposition comes in and decides, okay, I think because what usually motivates the children to do this is because the second speaker or the first speaker would flag the argument or would probably do a bit of preemption or rebuttal and say, B has these particular limitations. So the second speaker would be bright and say, I think for us, we are going to prefer both. Over here, I think the win goes to the one who stuck to the burden of the motion. And this is what I meant by content. Because in the content, if you understand the burden of the motion, you're able to give us the appropriate content. So if you understood that my burden is to defend B, whether or not it is a self-defeating case or a self-defeating motion, because sometimes when motions are created, sometimes it means that it is an automatic maybe win for affirmative or an automatic win for opposition. So at that point in time, if opposition decides to be very fraudulent and says, at that point in time, it's not okay. Do you mean to say duality in prefer motions equals to an automatic loss? So let us answer this. Number one, I want to say yes and I want to say no, in as much as there is nothing like an automatic fourth or an automatic loss. Why is this the case? So let me begin with yes. Yes, because number one, assuming you are in a top room or a good room, because most of the speakers that you're going to be judging are going to represent the country in the national. So at this point, we realize that these teams are not going to be giving one-liner statements. Let us assume that all of them are world standard, world school debating WSDC standard, all of them. So there are 72 speakers and above. So around there. So when that happens, the affirmative decides to say we are preferring A and they stick to their motion and they do all the extensive analysis and give you the content as to whatever happens. For speakers B, in as much as they're not giving one-liner statements, they've given extensive analysis, and then they decide, okay, because this one has been rebutted, we cannot keep on defending a rebutted case because it is kind of going to be weak. So let us decide to prefer both. At this point in time for this duality, the win would go to proposition. And maybe here you could explain one, because they stuck to their role. They stuck to their role, they gave the appropriate content, and also did the burden of the motion. And also the second yes becomes yes because one, notice that if you decide to stick to, if these guys, opposition, decide to say that they prefer A and B, they prefer both, what is the content that they're giving you? And by content, I mean argumentation. What is the argumentation that they're giving you? At that point in time, as an adjudicator, you're becoming confused. Because in the briefing, before we assign you to roles or CAP assigns you to roles or the tab master, they usually give you the speaker and the judge briefing. And they usually give in adjudication briefing. So at that point in time, when a speaker comes in at that point in time and starts telling you they prefer both, notice that the argumentation from there is going to be explaining why do we at that point in time. So that content is a problem mismatch to what the motion is expecting loss in those particular two ways. The second one, which becomes a no, is in a scenario where proposition, yes, in as much as they prefer A, yes, they have one-liner statements and all these things. And then inside opposition, they prefer both and they're really doing that extensive analysis. So you're going to be saying, but these people probably have stuck to their roles. It is just that over here, they've just preferred both. What should happen? And sometimes in these particular scenarios, you find that sometimes in certain rooms, proposition did not make sense. Points of information that they are given. You notice that in points of information, there are two ways to ask a POI or to front a POI. The most common one is what we all speakers, or I'm sorry if you're not a speaker, that speakers love doing. I would probably ask your POI and I am fronting my case, which is really not acceptable, but then it just passes in the head of the speakers, but they usually do it anyway. So they will raise their hand and propose their argumentation or their case through the POI at that point in time. The second one is usually a speaker would ask a question like, POI to second affirmative, and then the second affirmative takes, and then they are asked, do you believe in affirmative action? This one is more of a trap POI, because based on yes or no, that speaker has probably not spoken, the one who's asked the POI. But then when the speaker says no or the speaker says yes, you'll just hear them tapping the table or banging the biro pens and all that, or snapping. At this point, if the speaker says yes, depending on maybe what the opposition was looking for, maybe it was something that they had said that they do not want the DEI project or things like that. But then again, they go on to say that they want affirmative action. And then now in these POIs is where they come in to tell you these people are contradicting themselves. They need to tell us what their stance is. But even then, Chair, if these people believe in affirmative action, the kind of model that they've given ahead there is really not appropriate at that point in time. So these are some of the POIs that you're going to find in very advanced rooms. So it's just going to be a question. Do you believe in diversity? Do you believe in accountability? Would you prefer accountability over corruption? And somebody will just go, definitely accountability, and then they start snapping. And at that point in time, then they tell you why probably these people have shot themselves in the foot because of this and this and taking their stance. So based on how best you found that these people answered the point of information, or maybe what people are speaking about, there are certain times where I can be asked a POI, do I believe in accountability or do I believe in corruption? And then I say I believe in accountability. And then now the speaker who comes after me, who is my opponent, comes in to point the loopholes in my case. So over here, when I am judging, in as much as let's say that this is a standard room, everyone has stuck to their roles, everyone has done everything. Now it bends down to the clashes. So I look at the POIs because the POIs can point, this is the clash or the bone of contention. So I could point out if I am a panelist and say, Chair, the reason why I might not advocate for proposition to win was because, do you remember the point of information that they were asked? Do you believe in accountability or corruption? And they say they believe in accountability. But do you remember the model that even opposition has pointed out, that the model that they gave contradicts the whole tenets or the principles of accountability in their case? It kind of points down or blends down to nepotism or corruption at that point in time. So those are some of the metrics that you can look at. They answered this POI in this particular way, but this POI also, it directed us to show the loophole in this particular content, or probably kind of diverted our attention to the most important thing that needs to be prioritized in the debate. Because if they say they believe in accountability, probably they made no case in accountability. So opposition comes in to say, these guys say they believe in accountability, but don't show you how they solve the problem of not having accountability in status quo. We're the only ones who give you that. They said yes, but then again, the yes is not enough. They need to give you argumentation as to why this and this and this happens. The only team that has been able to do this is ABCD, or my partner said this. And over here, speakers usually now say my first speaker should be the one getting the highest speakers code, sorry, and all that and all that. So you can also look at the pure eyes and all that. Now, the last thing also you could want to look at sometimes is also the clashes. You want to look at the clashes, and the clashes would come about, for example, proposition could say that they believe in accountability, but opposition would say, yes, even us, we believe in. So clashes could happen, I think, in two ways, or maybe in three ways. So the first one, that is proposition will say, we believe in accountability. And then they say, this is how accountability is obtained in our world. They say, jail all the corrupt people. In opposition, they say, we believe in accountability, but the only way to give in accountability is probably limit the amount of salary that you're giving politicians and all that. So both of them believe in accountability. The clash is, how then is this accountability obtained? Or how then is this accountability, how then does this, the accountability, which accountability do you buy into? Is it the one that jails all the corrupt people or gives politicians little salary and all that? Because maybe if you give them little salary, they would always want to probably account for the money and this and this and this. So now that clash becomes, yes, all of them believe in accountability, but how they obtain this accountability becomes the problem. Who wins this particular clash? You realize that proposition is on part A, opposition is in part B. So based on one, extensive analysis, B, lack of contradictions in their statements and probably in their argumentation, but even C, what you buy into as an adjudicator based on how the status quo or how that world where the debate is taking place has been painted for you. What do you buy into as a judge? And that is how sometimes teams win the clashes. Most especially if the speakers have not told you that you maybe prioritize this and this. And they would tell you that because they would tell you this is how the status quo looks like. So if they tell you that status quo people are marginalized and maybe they do not have a form of accessing the judicial service system, so it means that most of them don't have access to lawyers. So it means that the person with the direct power or the imminent power, that is the government, should work on behalf of the marginalized people. So maybe there you're prioritizing the rights of the marginalized people. So at that point in time, if maybe the debate goes on like that, so it blends down to how you would want accountability to be seen, or how you buy accountability can be obtained at that world that the debate is happening. Sometimes the teams could probably not tell you explicitly, so it is up to you to choose for yourself. But then I think the trainers are doing a good job in telling the speakers to explicitly state that this is what you need to prioritize and this is what you need to do. And that is why I told you, unlike in my presentation as I started, the first speaker would always begin by flagging these things. They would always begin by stating all these things and how they and what you need to look out for and why they are going to win that debate, because they will tell you this, they will tell you that, they will solve this, they're going to prove why this and this and this is not likely, even though opposition seems like they are the likely winners and all that. The last thing I want us to look at again is speech evaluation. And before that, I want to do this. Certain prejudices that we need to dispel, or certain fallacies we need to dispel while judging WSDC. The speaker time is 8 minutes, yes. In some rooms, not in rooms, but in certain tournaments, you're going to find that speakers have spoken for 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Sometimes they speak for 7 minutes, but depending on the time that you've been told that this is how this WSDC in this tournament is running. So I do not expect that because the first proposition maybe spoke for 5 minutes and they had 8 minutes, spoke sense actually. They didn't come in and say, my name is this and this, I did ABCD, and so these are my argumentation, just said a statement and then sat down, thank you. Some speakers will do that, and there is a way that you're supposed to judge them. I think you give them low, either 63 or 64, but I think 63 at that point in time, which is very low. But then there are certain times where the speaker could speak for 3 minutes, but will just explain one argument very well. Or maybe you say the way this argument was explained or fronted, this is an average argumentation. It is okay. I could buy into it. So do not penalize the speaker or say that their team is going to lose because one of their partners spoke for less than 8 minutes. Maybe the second speaker comes in and speaks maybe for 5 minutes. At least they've tried. And this usually affects teams which are usually new in WSDC. So maybe this weekend we are going to maybe train St. Mary's students, and then maybe they did not have debate, and then they come in, meet other teams there, and then you're the judge. You probably don't know that St. Mary's is new, but then you notice a trend. In the room you're judging, the first proposition has spoken for 3 minutes, second proposition 4 minutes, third proposition maybe 6 minutes or 4 minutes, but they are saying sense. The opposition teams are probably rebutting, and because of that experience are probably looking at loopholes and all that, and are really doing their very best and all that. So if maybe say that at this point, because of exposure and like a lot of research, opposition won, it is fortunate, fortunate. But then in your explanation, do not tell the proposition you lost because you spoke for less than 8 minutes. And this is something that I want us to dispel. Don't tell them you lost because you did this and this and this. Because even in as much as in WSDC, we are also big on like team partnership and how we really collaborate as a team, and also on the time. What I would advise you probably to do not say that you lost because of like less time. Explain what made them to lose. Maybe by time you could probably say the little time that you spoke might not have allowed you to probably do some extensive analysis or do a lot of rebuttals on opposition case. Therefore, the more they did rebuttals on your case, your case became weak and very like less standing. So what I would propose that you do in the next round, maybe round 2, is that instead of speaking for 4 minutes, in as much as maybe you're new or maybe it is your first time or you're shy, just bear in mind that with 8 minutes, speakers who speak a lot most of the time, and they're speaking sense here. They're not speaking nonsense, they're speaking sense, they're speaking content, they're speaking matter. So just tell them, you see, when opposition is speaking for that 8 minutes and they're doing a lot of rebuttals, there's a way that they're doing some analysis. So when you're doing rebuttal, sometimes you just find yourself falling in a spirit of just doing extensive analysis and like just doing deconstructive argumentation or deconstructive analysis and all that in the opposition or the opponent's cases. So you explain to them that when you use little time to speak, you do not allow yourself room to probably explore the other team's loopholes and all that. And that really limits you from winning the debate and all that. Because these are kids. these are students, and you want to adjudicate them in the best way, but you're also looking at, this is my judging criteria. So how you're judging is based on maybe that is what happened, and how you're going to tell them might not be the way they processed what you wanted to say. So you tell them in a nice way that you would probably want to consider speaking for a long time and all that. Second scenario could be speaker spoke for 4 minutes, speaker one, speaker two, 3 minutes, speaker three, maybe let's say 5 minutes, and they spoke good things. They spoke sense. They didn't speak nonsense. They spoke very good things. They spoke wonderful matter and all that. Opposition spoke for a long time, but this is where you find that they are having the rhetorical argumentation. Most of their cases are one-liner statements, and then it comes in a rhetorical. And most of the speakers who do rhetorical argumentation usually circumnavigate around the same thing. By circumnavigating, I mean they are rounding towards one thing. Like, instead of proceeding to the next argument, they are saying one and the same thing, maybe for like 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or explaining the same thing. And in WSDC, it is very easy for speakers to do this. And at this point is where you find that judges probably start biting their nails, others start going to WhatsApp to comment, and then the CAP asks you, but I think you're a judge and all that. And so you zone off and all that. It is because the speaker is explaining one thing for 5 minutes. So the other minute, maybe it is just one-liner statement, and then once they finish, is they tell you, we've been able to say this and this, we've told you this and this, and then with that, they rest their case because the bell has rung and all that. So for here, you need to prioritize the person who has done extensive analysis, regardless of the time that they have spoken. And this is what we call speech evaluation. When you're looking at somebody's speech, number one, you don't just look at, I have spoken for 8 minutes, but you also look at the quality of the things they are saying. I could have spoken for 1 hour, but I've said nonsense. I might not have achieved the objective that you expected me to do. So you also look at the quality. Somebody can speak to you for only 5 minutes, but has spoken very good sense, something that can enable you to get 5 million tomorrow. So that is something you need to consider at that point in time. So for this second scenario, the win would go to a proposition at that point in time, because these people are speaking sense. In their speech evaluation, they are able to have a bit of content you can resonate with, content you can sit down as a panel and say, we are advocating for this team because they have said this, they have analyzed this, and they explicitly told you. In fact, here, you don't even need to, their case is just self-defending. Sometimes you don't need to go for words or look for words to say this, because sometimes even in panels, when we sit down, we start asking other judges, but did they say this really? Did they say this? And so we fall into the category of being whip judges. So when you find that even if a team has spoken for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 6 minutes, but then they've spoken something good, you can give them the win. But then again, also, it is encouraged that the speakers use 8 minutes. So another strategy I could advocate for, you might want to maybe penalize the whole room, or maybe penalize the speakers by, maybe if it was a 72 speech, or maybe a 70 or a 69 speech, you could probably reduce it to -1 or -2, and probably tell them they took the win. But then again, because of the time that they spoke, you have decided to maybe like penalize, although we are not allowed to discuss the speakers scores with the students or with the speakers, because that is confidential between CAP and you and the panels. Only when it is an open round, you just give them the rankings, but you don't say with 100 and something speaker scores like that. No, you don't say that. So that is scenario 2. And then now, something that comes out general for these two scenarios is this: that one, you need to look at the quality of the content that is being fronted, regardless of the time that has been spent spoken. But even then, because the standard rule is usually you have to speak for 8 minutes, so that you do not lower the value. Because I want you to imagine, if let's say we are giving the win to this speakers who are speaking for this little time, and they're the ones representing us in the nationals, or maybe East Africa, or maybe any other country present, you see the standard is that if they meet countries from maybe or other continents, then it is going to be a disservice to them. So I would advise penalize the speak, so that even though they are fast, they could probably ask themselves, why did we not break, and things like that. And you also explain to them in OA if it is an open round, that in as much as it was an opposition win or a proposition win, but the room was below average. So when the speakers hear that, they're like, okay, why? So you have to tell them, you can't spend little time doing this and this and this and this and all that. So you penalize also with the speaker scores, meaning that when the tab is looking, or when CAP is looking at the speakers advancing, they're only looking at quality, because you therefore do not want those speakers who are not like quality in terms of content, but even not exhausting their time. Because I mean, we are having speakers who balance both. So I think it is probably fair that even if they were ranking second, at least even if their room was an above average, they'd rather proceed than the one maybe that you keep on giving them a 72 and they spoke for 4 minutes. It doesn't do justice. So I hope I've tackled how to go about that. Let me answer the questions that were put over here, and then like we can go to the others. Mhm. What is a judge supposed to do in a room where the cases run a parallel? Thank you so much for this question, Nelson. So there are certain times in a room where proposition does maybe the opposition burden, then opposition does the proposition burden, and you realize here it is a mix up, and sometimes they don't call each other out. At this particular point in time, you have to decide who you're giving the win, because over here, all of them, in as much as they've stuck to the speaker roles, but they've not stuck to the burden of the motion. So I cannot really tell you based on what transpired in the room. What I usually tell the judges, the only hint I tell you is who was at least relevant. Who was at least relevant. So you give the win to the person who was at least relevant, but this is a below average room, because really both of you can't really fail to understand the motion, and you don't call each other out. It is like you have collided to work against CAP and the integrity of the tournament, because you don't expect us to take speakers who don't understand the burden of the motion to the national level. So it is going to be a below average room. And then maybe the second way that this question could be parallel could also be that maybe the speakers are contradicting themselves. So sometimes maybe opposition began well or proposition began well, then in the middle, people decided to sway off. Over here also, try to look at who is at least the most relevant over here. But you'll also have to penalize the room as to maybe being average at least, or maybe below average, based on how the debate round went at that point in time. Then, the other question is, I answered the one for duality in a prefer motion equals to an automatic loss. So this one for duality equals to an automatic loss becomes two ways. It could be an automatic loss one if maybe say proposition has preferred A and has stuck to the role of the motion, has done everything that the motion required, and then opposition, which was supposed to prefer B to A, decides that okay, I am not going to prefer any of them. I will prefer both. And because why I say this one equals to an automatic loss is because when I, as a speaker, come in to tell you, let us say I prefer a world where superhumans exist to where superhumans do not exist. So proposition is preferring a world where superhumans exist. In opposition, I'm trying to say I don't want a world where people like Marvel or those characters are existing. I just want us human beings to exist like that. That is the burden of the motion. Then I decide to tell you guys as the panel, no, I prefer both, where superhumans and humans are existing. Notice the content I will give you is going to justify why a world where both of them are existing is actually going to be a mutual world where superhumans don't infringe on the rights of humans, where maybe superhumans and humans are friends, and like there's that celebrity culture, the criminal justice system is actually good and all that, but it is going to be majorly mostly based on both of them existing in one world. What is my counterfactual? And you see, now this is why I was saying at this particular point, because of your content and the kind of argumentation which you're going to probably justify, I might give you an automatic loss. Because what is your counterfactual? The counterfactual for proposition is B. You see, if I prefer A to B, the counterfactual then is going to be that this and this is happening. And because of that, then we think that the problems happening in that counterfactual is this and this and this. So if maybe proposition is supposed to pose to opposition a pure I and ask, what is the counterfactual? What are they going to answer? So they are making the debate problematic based on we now don't have a clear counterfactual. We don't even know, like, okay, what is your direct stance? Because now you make the debate problematic to engage a world where it is now very unfair for prop. They are preferring superhumans. The motion expected you to prefer no superhumans, but you want both. So you want the easiest way to win. You're being fraudulent. That could be an automatic loss. But even secondly, it might not be an automatic loss where maybe proposition maybe was irrelevant per se. In as the only fault of opposition was to prefer both, but they were at least relevant. You at least understood what they were saying. Whereas from team proposition, they don't even convince you. They just say maybe one-liner statements, or maybe whatever they're saying, they don't even bother to rebut and all that. I think at that point in time, the person who maybe convinces you maybe wins at that point, but you will also have to mark that room as a low, like maybe below average at that point in time, because it can't be that both of you don't understand your burdens, you don't call each other out, you can't conspire against CAP at that point in time. Could I please have clarity on which type of motions where speakers have the fear to assume that the policy will happen automatically? So thank you so much for this. I did not carry samples of motions exactly, but in the type of motions where you're expected to give a policy is usually this house would, THBT should, and then TH as A would do B or will do B. So these are the policy motions that you're having. The last one is an ACTA motion, but an ACTA motion also doubles up as a policy motion because you expect proposition to give you a policy of how A is going to do B, how they're going to carry it out. At this particular point in time, what we usually say is the fiat is usually this. And I usually tell government has the significant power to define the debate, and they should not be challenged in most instances. So if they say that the debate takes place in this particular context or because of this and this and this, so they have the ability to fiat that. So if the debate is debatable, OP is not supposed to come in to say that they do not think so, because, or maybe they do not feel that they agree with the government at that point in time. So maybe as judges, we are inclined to go with what the government is saying. So for example, in this motion, which I was telling you about carbon credits, the government came in and said the debate takes place. This debate is taking place in countries which have bought into the climate change narrative and all that. I don't know if opposition was listening or not, but they came in to say that this thing is going to be problematic because United States has bought out of the Paris 2010 climate change deal. We also have climate change deniers. And if your government has not allocated money for that because they're climate change deniers, then it is going to affect this and this and this. Yeah, the government had clearly stated that this debate exists in a world where climate change is real, or people or governments believe in this, they have bought into COP something, something, something. So that kind of fiat, or like that kind of model that they've created, or like they tell you that the debate exists here, automatically takes out the whole argumentation of opposition that this carbon credit thing is not possible because the government is maybe climate change denier and all that. It takes away all that particular kind of argumentation. So when they tell you the debate exists in this and this and this, but also then your adjudicators, your average intelligent voters, sometimes governments could use this as a form of squirreling the motion. So you need to note that. And I think that is why Tiny T asked clarity on these particular motions. Although I cannot give you the exact wording of the motions, like maybe this house would ban this and this and this, but then I could tell you that maybe you have a fiat, or maybe let us just use this house would ban drugs. So there's a fiat that the government, now not the government of the day, but the proposition debating that team has enough resources to do so. One, but even secondly, it can wake up and start that policy today or even tomorrow. It is only up to them to say that we will implement this next year, or we will implement this after next year. Assuming we are debating we want to ban drugs during COVID time. So somebody is going to say, we have vulnerable diseases and other things, and people are getting sick. So maybe a bright government here would probably say, we are going to implement this policy next year, presuming that COVID, or maybe WHO has said COVID is ending next year. So if we were debating this in 2020 at that point, so they could assume that they will implement this in 2021 because COVID is going to be over by then, and then tell you this debate is existing maybe in developed countries, maybe not developing countries, and all that. So if they tie it to that, it is okay. The motion allows them to do that. But then again, you should also try to look at soft models. Soft models is something that you really need to look at. And these soft models, when governments look at soft models, opposition teams are the ones who usually end up winning the debate. Because this is what happens in a soft model. Soft models equals to soft stances automatically, because if you give me a soft model, most of the argumentations that you're going to be making are implicitly going to make sense in my mind as, or will translate in my mind as, you're taking a soft model. For example, the motion is this house would legalize this house would legalize all drugs. This house would legalize all drugs. I debated this motion last year. Then this government decided, I was in government, but then my government decided that, okay, we're going to legalize only. They said we legalize all drugs, but then they said they came in and actually gave the extension that you were having in briefing. They came in and said, you know what, government has the fiat to do this and this and this. We can say this and this and this. And then they came in to say, panel, for the purpose of this debate, or for this particular room, government is going to legalize only marijuana. Yet the motion is saying all drugs. At that point, you've squirreled the motion. Opposition can call you out. But then again, the problem with such teams, they will always end up sticking to their stances, even if they've been asked clarity and all that. So at that point in time, it becomes problematic. So what opposition is going to argue at that point is that they're going to call them out at that point, and then like they're going to explain why the government model is undebatable and why a soft stance is usually not a good thing in a debate. Mostly also, judge the debate also, did the debate take place when proposition took the soft stance, or did they take a hard stance also? I usually prioritize teams which take a hard stance most of the time. Because when you take a hard stance, it's either you're getting a first or a last. And the reason is because you will always go all out to explain your arguments. You will leave no stone unturned. Whereas when you do a soft stance, you're neither here, you're neither there. So when I am in a panel maybe of 5 or 7 people, what am I going to advocate to the panel to vote for you for? What did you stand for? You didn't stand for accountability, you are just here and there. At least maybe opposition was like, we will legalize corruption and all this. They are open to their idea. So you also need to notice that at that point in time. If that question has really not been answered very well, I think I'm going to try and get the exact wordings of the motion and then send it to you. What should be done in a narrative motion when teams deviate? Yes, thank you so much for this motion, for this question. So teams usually deviate from debating the narrative and then switch off to other things. So you notice that over here, it usually impacts debate in different ways. That number one, the main bone of contention for that debate does not become the bone of contention that has been debated in your room. Secondly, whatever you are going to prioritize, because sometimes I believe that as judges, before you go to the room, you usually tell yourself, this is what the motion requires, this is what the motion does not require, at least for your knowledge. And maybe when a team could corner you and ask you, what is my burden in this motion during OA and all that. So you always want to know all those things. So when they deviate from doing all that, you need to note that down, one. But even secondly, sometimes these teams don't call themselves out because they've deviated at that point in time. So you will have to judge the debate based on what took place. I understand that CAP gave a narrative motion, or maybe gave a motion on this house supports the increase of something. So they stopped debating the increase of something and debated about that something itself. You need to judge the debate as it took place. As it took place means, who was the most relevant in that debate? Who convinced you at least at that point in time? Because either way over here, I can't tell you give opposition first or give proposition first, because both teams, one, did not call each other out on that, but even secondly, did poor in understanding the burden and the role of the motion. So that falls on you as the obligation as a judge. When you sit down, am I able to understand what proposition is saying? Am I able to understand what opposition is saying? Okay, based on how the motion is framed, who best convinces me at least? Because there's a certain way the motion is framed as a narrative. Nobody argues the narrative, but you sit down, but you tell yourself, I think opposition still convinces me regardless. At least proposition still convinces me regardless. So there are those instances where that happens. So you vote for the person who at least convinces you. At least you are able to understand them at this point. Because if both of us don't debate the narrative, both proposition and opposition, we are confusing you as the judge. So you're in a state of ever confusion. So at least who lessened the confusion for you is the person you're putting for as first. But in your OA, be kind as to tell us, in as much as this person was fast, they were fast because I was able to understand this and this. But then again, these were the obligations or the burden of the motion. None of you maybe did up to this extent, but then I voted for opposition because I understood this. At least I was able to understand maybe how the narrative impacts this and all that. Maybe there is a way their argumentation at least somehow relates to the narrative. You vote them in for that point in time. Mhm. Um, and this also applies to all motions. By the way, judges and potential maybe judges, speakers who've come for this call and they want to be judges, you need to notice that whenever CAP is giving you a motion and or has given the students or the kids or the children the motion, there's a way these children had researched the motion. There's a way you maybe in briefing we've been given the feedback that this is how the motion is supposed to be. Unless maybe CAP says that you give first to the person who says this and this and this, you judge the debate based on how it takes place. The standard rule for any debating that takes place, especially in WSDC, is go to the room, regardless of the briefing that you received. I can tell you give first to the person who gave in a policy. In your room, nobody gave in a policy. This is where now your average intelligent voting comes in. You have to use your brain and say, this, in as much as proposition didn't front in a Because one, once the model has already been proved, the opposition is now going to blend down to the actors and all that. Just evaluate them well. But also then, if they tell you that they also require asymmetric fiat, remind them that their model, even if they're requiring, you can buy that. Just tell them, okay, assuming that, okay, you have the same fiat, but the policy of or the standard for WSDC debating is that when government has given this counter model or has given this particular policy and all these things, when opposition gives in a counter policy to say this and this and this, their policy is supposed to require little resources to execute. So it has got to require little resources. Second, less complicated than what the government is advocating for at that point in time. So you also need to look for those particular things. Little resources to execute and less complicated. But even three, the burden still also falls on them to explain why their burden is still better. Even you can just buy that their fiat, because by the way, this is what teams like doing, especially in round 4, round 5. Now everyone is going to start attacking your model. So it's okay, allow them to keep on continue attacking, but then blend down to the questions and probably say, I judge the debate based on, okay, I just accepted that, okay, opposition has this fiat, but then again, now I wanted to see how is your model better than government? Because it is one thing for me to tell or point to the panel, I have the same fiat to do this, and then I tell you that. But then I do not explain to you how my model is probably better in as much as I have the same power. But how is my model in the capacity of me having the same power better than that of the government, one? But even secondly, mitigating most of the harms that government's model is bringing about, because government's model probably could bring about pollution. It could probably bring about killing of marginalized people or executing the marginalized, say the Maasai from Tanzania or Kenya, from their areas of living. What happens at that point in time? So you need to show how you kind of like solve those particular problems. Now tell them, I needed to see you go beyond that discussion that you have the same symmetrical fiat, because okay, assuming all of you have the same fiat and like you say all that, but then it is not enough for you to win that debate. You now need to tell me, based on your capacity, now that you have the same power as government, how you're going to solve the problems that government has brought about as a result of their model and all that. What's the difference between THP and THP award where motions? Okay, thank you. Let us do this. So I think it was in PAUDC 2022. We had this house prefers a world where karmic, was it karmic reincarnation? Oh, I don't know. This house prefers a world where there is a world where this house prefers a world where religion, I think it was karmic reincarnation over, yeah, there was karmic reincarnation, but this was not PAUDC. There was karmic reincarnation. I think karmic, I don't remember. This house prefers a world where karmic reincarnation exists. There's this one, and then there's TH prefers a world where religions preach heaven and hell over religions that preach reincarnation. So, in a bit to answer THP and THP, so the first one, this house prefers a world where karmic reincarnation exists. So, for this motion, the burden of proposition or government bench is to tell us how a world where karmic reincarnation exists and what happens. For opposition, they don't prefer a world where karmic reincarnation exists. So they could prefer any other world, but it should not have karmic reincarnation. Over here, it is very open. So they could decide maybe that instead of karmic reincarnation, so opposition could say, instead of karmic reincarnation, for us, we want a world where people just die and their story is over. We don't see them, we don't hear them, and all that. We don't get to hear from them. Or maybe, secondly, we prefer a world where maybe there's no karmic reincarnation, but I don't know, I don't know which other world could exist besides just dying and you're just forgotten like that. But they could prefer that world. It is very open. So they would probably tell you that. But for option B, a world where religions are preaching reincarnation, at this point in time, proposition is probably provided for you. And that's the difference, the counterfactual. There is one which the counterfactual is probably very different. Like, besides karmic reincarn like besides dying, there could be another form of like alternative existing in other religions. Maybe you become I don't know, maybe instead of like reincarnating as a dog or a cat, opposition could say you just die and your story is over like that. Or maybe in another like religion, maybe you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell, and maybe that is the reparation, because most of these debates like kind of target maybe reparation to like maybe the harms that you did to people, especially if you're a bad person. But even secondly, how do we restore the balance of justice and maybe like morality at that point in time? So in like the counterfactual is very much open. It is very much open. It is not limited. But in B, the counterfactual is limited. So if I prefer a world where religions are preaching heaven and hell over religions that are preaching reincarnation at this point in time, proposition is supposed to stick with heaven and hell and show why the counterfactual of reincarnation, specifically targeting opposition, is bad. Whereas opposition is supposed to prefer reincarnation and tell us why the counterfactual of heaven and hell is bad. But you notice in the first one, in karmic reincarnation, opposition could have different counterfactuals, because proposition could ask, so what's your counterfactual? They could have a world where people just die and their story is over. A world maybe where you have heaven and hell, meaning that you have a deity and all that. So the counterfactual is probably open at that point. So opposition could decide that, okay, for us, we are going with the counterfactual of um, heaven and hell, or just living, and then once you're done, your case is over like that. We don't hear from you. The world keeps on like evoluting the way Charles Darwin said, and we continue like that. So that is the difference at that point in time. It is the counterfactual. I didn't carry a lot of prefer motions, but in the prefer motion where it is just THP, okay, what I mean is THP x over y, and THP a world where x exists over y. Okay, if you prefer x over y on both sides, so a world where, so THP a world where x exists over y, and you prefer x over y. Okay, so if you prefer x over y, you're probably trying to, I think it's one and the same, only that the wording is different. Personally, that's what I can say. If you prefer x over y or a world where x exists over y, the burdens are the same, the counterfactuals are probably the same. It is only that the wording is different. Why do I say this? Because normally, notice how people or debaters begin their wordings in a prefer motion. They will usually start by telling you, panel, in a world where X exists, this is what you find. And then you find something that they do called weighing, comparative analysis is usually more and very heavy on THP, THR, and all this, but mostly on T. sorry, not saying, but weighing. Let me just edit it. Let me edit message. Weighing. Weighing. So on the weighing and the comparative analysis, what happens is this. The speakers tell you, in a world where X exists, and I'm tackling this house prefers X over Y. So normally what we usually do, we tell the chairs or the panel, in a world where X exists, we mitigate for the harms of marginalized people being thrown away from their indigenous homes. We try to at least reparate maybe the indigenous communities, like maybe say the Black Indians or the Red Indians in the United States of America, and all this vis-a-vis a world where you have Y, given that they do not prefer diversity at that point in time, but even secondly, they are only given money to forget their ancestral land, and that we feel that it is problematic because these are the implications. Then, when I come to this house prefers a world where X exists over Y, the only difference between that is that over here, they've already given me a picture of the world. But in X, I had to paint the picture of the world. So the burdens are just the same and all that. You just do weighing and comparative analysis. So it is definitely like kind of really not different. The only difference I feel is for this one, which one is always this house prefers this, a world where karmic reincarnation exists and it just ends like that, because it gives the opposition team an open room for exploring any of the counterfactuals that they deem fit for them. At this point, I would want Jelusa to probably type if I've answered their question or not, and any other person who has questions to ask. So Jelusa, I'm waiting for you to type. Have I answered your question? As Jelusa is typing, something that I've not probably explicitly stated again is this. When you're evaluating speeches, I've probably spoken about extensive, okay, thank you. I've spoken about extensive analysis of argumentations should be prioritized. Should be prioritized. You also need to look at the weighing of the argumentation. And mostly the people or the person who does this is the third speaker. So they come in and weigh and tell you, I think you need to prioritize accountability versus maybe transparency, or prioritize accountability over humanity of people, because this is where you get money, this is where you get reparations and things like that. You also get a comparative analysis. This one could and comparative analysis could probably come from the second and also the third speaker. This is where they come in to tell you that, okay, compare a world where you get accountability, but you get it by jailing all corrupt people. I think you spend a lot of resources by doing that. There is a backlog in the JCS system or the CGS system at that point in time, vis-a-vis a world where you probably make politics a less appealing job. That would mean that politicians would always want to kind of like watch their spending so that they can get increment of salary. And by that, we feel that they become very doting and very loving and very accountable. We tend to think that the kind of like a model that kind of gives you less time but more efficiency is something that you really need to buy, and hence you get good accountability from one, looking at where there is no backlog of cases and things like that. So that is how comparative analysis looks like. So you can evaluate the speech also based on that. They tell you, and like also comparative analysis mostly is done whenever there are clashes at that point in time. So when teams are not like really sure, proposition says everyone has debated well, but they're telling me, judge, prioritize the person who wants to legalize corruption. The other one, no, judge, prioritize the person who values humanity at that point in time. They need to do for you a comparative analysis. It is one thing to tell me the burdens or like the objectives or the metrics I'm supposed to use to judge you, but a second thing to do a comparative analysis for me to see why I should prioritize that one. But even secondly, the impacts that come of it, they need to be benefit. The third thing in weighing the speeches, the content or the argumentation needs to be solving problems at that point in time. There are problems that we need to be solving in the debate. In WSDC also, the rule is usually that when a speaker is speaking or when you're fronting an argumentation, at least solve something. You cannot eradicate poverty, you cannot eradicate diseases, but you can minimize them. And this is where you find speakers telling you, Chair, we might not have impacted 20 million people, but for the little marginalized people, the LGBTQ chair, please vote for us on that front. So they need to show you the scope of the impact at that point in time. So you also evaluate based on that. Another thing that you also look at, is it really urgent? And like by urgency, this might really not be very like obvious, because there are certain ways that teams just argue, but you do not really see that, okay, I should prioritize this because of the time frame and all that. But there are certain times that teams just come and blatantly tell you climate change is a hazard. You need to prioritize it, because in the next 6 months, maybe Azerbaijan is going to tax us, or maybe we are going to be jailed, or maybe the JSAs, maybe in maybe California or any other place, is going to make us all drown. We don't want that. Prioritize this for the essence of saving lives. You always want to look at that. Another thing also in speech evaluation, maybe I can write down, is the logical premises of the argumentations. And this is where I was saying, I probably didn't call it logical, but this all blends down to, have you ever judged a room and you really don't understand how these people are going to achieve this, and they are really contradicting themselves? But then again, the more they keep on explaining, the more their case appears illogical, and you're just confused. Even though opposition doesn't call them out, but you're just like, I don't understand. Have you ever also been in a room and you're adjudicating, you're seated in the panel, and one panel tells you, but I didn't even understand what opposition. And the first thing we usually do as judges, we ask, by the way, did you understand what opposition was saying? So when you hear your panel or you yourself asking yourself, did you understand this? It's because maybe the logical premise was faulty, or the logical analysis as to how maybe the person arrived to that conclusion is probably faulty. The person tells you that they are going to eradicate corruption, but they tell you that the way they're going to do this probably is by giving in a carbon tax of 20%. That is somehow illogical, or it doesn't make sense, or you're probably just speaking gibberish. So you need to you need to see, just get a rubric where you're writing that the speaker was probably not maybe making sense logically, and maybe they need to improve on that. And you find good English and good ways of telling these children like that. You don't want to bruise their ego, or you don't want that maybe right now, maybe they were in their A levels or O levels of Form 1, and then maybe next year when maybe they're in their senior year, at that point they can't turn up for trials because this judge told them that they were speaking gibberish or nonsense. A speaker can speak nonsense, a speaker cannot be logical, but when we are going to deliver OA, we don't tell them that, because people are having different backgrounds of debating. People are coming to debate for different objectives. There are some people who are coming for these nationals, as you're going to see, because maybe somebody told them they would never make it. So they're here to prove a point and all that. Then you come in and tell them they were speaking nonsense. You come in to tell them other things. This is where you find that now speakers start answering. You get this back and forth between a speaker and a judge. Or then the speaker goes to equity and says that you manhandled them or you mistreated them. So get good English to mask up for the bad things that the speakers are doing, because they are children. They might not really be children per se, but you want to look at their mental health. Sometimes you ask yourself, how would I receive feedback? Would I receive feedback if somebody kept on abusing me, telling me I said nonsense and all that? Or would I receive feedback? It's called constructive feedback. So there's one coach called Coach Mays who usually says, give speakers constructive feedback at that point. So you tell them, for example, that I think then you would probably want to analyze how you arrive to this particular conclusion. Because when you say this and this, it doesn't make sense. So when you put yourself in this position, get this rubric, ask yourself why, ask yourself how, is it making sense? Then I think you're giving us a clear criteria of how your model is being achieved, and we are able to buy into that. When you tell somebody that kind of feedback, you've even given them inspiration to kind of sit down and like rethink their speeches instead of telling them that their speech was nonsense. So you look at the logical premise of the argumentation. Um, so you always want to look at also, do they make sense logically? Because if they don't make sense logically, I don't know how you're even able to buy into that particular kind of case at that point in time. The last thing that you also we also look at the time frame, which is known as urgency. The urgency of the matter is something that you always want to look at that point in time. You're also sometimes looking at the probability of the argumentation or event spoken about happening. So the probability, is it likely? So is it likely? Is it likely that it will happen? So as an average intelligent voter, if I tell you that the reason why we want to build underground bunkers, or maybe we want to advance technology, it is because the aliens are going to come in 2030. Okay, I don't know if this is a very verified information, but we have speakers like that. And I used to be that such a speaker. I would come into a room and tell the panel, the reason why we're doing this maybe is because in 2030, the aliens are going to invade planet Earth. And then something that I was told is, sometimes detach from the movies and the things that you watch. Is the probability of what I'm saying likely? Look at, debate doesn't take place in a bubble. It's not taking place on Netflix or the those worlds that of imagination. It is taking place in status quo, not in a vacuum. So number one, I need to come back and ask myself, based on what is happening on status quo, who verified that information, where was it obtained from, and all that. And then you come back and like probably adjudicate that argumentation. Why I was using myself as an example is because you have speakers like me who would come in to probably fiat that, or probably tell you that the United States is going to invade Somalia, and they will tell you it's going to happen next year. But then again, you look at again where United States is, where Somalia is, or maybe where Uganda is, or they tell you US is coming to invade because BCG has not been released at that point in time. I hope it's going to be released soon. So you ask yourself, but is it really probable? So now that is kind of far-fetched. Why I'm saying that is because some of the things people argue are far-fetched. What, because you, and this is now where you start asking again based on probability. The speakers have got to explain to you maybe what the actor or maybe what the person in question has an incentive in that area to probably do whatever they are saying that the person will do. If I say they are going to invade us, why? Like, is it likely? And why would they do that? Is it because maybe this was a United States citizen at one point? Is it maybe because you have infringed on the Miranda rights and all that? So you ask yourself all those things at that point in time. You can also like prioritize or evaluate a speech based on like principles. Principled argumentation. And I think this is
when I conclude this, I want to conclude with the principal argumentation. One thing I have not been able to answer until today is this. A speaker walked up to me and told me that in the room they were in, they were given last because they argued pragmatics over principles. Then they came to my room, and then I gave the team that argued principles, argued pragmatics over principles, and then they were like, okay, but what do judges prioritize? In room A, I was told I argued pragmatics over principles. This judge prioritizes this. This other one prioritizes this. So, as a judge, you need to look at judge bias again. Certain judges, and even us, are likely to probably give somebody who tells us things about bodily autonomy, things to do with the principles like accountability, freedom of speech, and all those things. You're likely to give that over the person who argues utilitarianism. But there are others who will give you a win because you argued utilitarianism, you argued how you're maximizing utility, and all those things. So there are people who you will always value that. But as a judge, you need to avoid the judge biasness when you're evaluating the speech of a child or maybe the student or the speaker. In yourself, this principled argumentation or pragmatic argumentation that has been made. Let me also write pragmatic argumentation. You don't need to be the person who buys over principles or pragmatic because I don't know it has a what touch. Just ask yourself, this principle argumentation, when a speaker is bringing it forth, why are they bringing it forth? One, is it to solve a certain problem? Is it to give us attention to a loophole that probably exists in the status quo? But again, in general, what is it doing? Is it mitigating a problem? Is it assisting us to minimize a certain problem and things like that? Because whether you're arguing a principle or a pragmatic, the end goal is usually to be that whether if a marginalized person exists in society, they are catered for. If maybe a poor person or a person who injustice has been perpetuated against them gets closure, maybe gets reparation at that point in time. As to how you arrive towards it, either it's principled, either it's pragmatic at that point in time. So you have to tell us, you have to explain to us. So maybe you can tell the students or the speakers, don't just like explain principle and leave it there. At least show us its purpose in the debate. Are you trying to point us towards lack of freedom of speech means that the marginalized people are going to die, or what and what and what? And so based on that, again now, they will also tell you what you should value at that point. Is it accountability, just the way I said, vis-a-vis maybe capitalism giving us profits and GDP? So they're going to tell you that. So these are some of the things that you look and evaluate at in a speech. But again, do whatever, just go and do what the judge is supposed to do in a room. Just sit down there and listen. If they didn't bring principled arguments or pragmatic, don't tell them you rank second because you didn't bring principled, because you didn't bring pragmatic, because you didn't do this and this and this. Judge them based on what they did. Then in personal feedback or maybe in general feedback, tell them this was the preferred thing that you should have done, or when CAP set this motion, they had this in mind at that point in time. So that is what you can do. Besides all these things that I have mentioned, is there something that you want me to explain in extensive? At this juncture, I want somebody to unmute and probably ask a question, what I need to probably explain further and all that. Okay, if there is none, then maybe in terms of conclusion, or as I conclude, some speakers, or maybe I don't know why you're not asking, but I usually get this question most of the time. should I penalize a team which did not have unity in terms of partnership and all that? So that is part of style and how the speakers are doing the style in terms of their presentation. So you as a judge, when you are looking at maybe I was not maybe in the order or collaborating with my partners and all that, you might want to penalize me for that through as through maybe deducting me -1 in my speaker score. But then again, consider, in as much as maybe I did not like maybe collaborate with the team, but then again we were the most relevant and we deserve to win. Let us win, but maybe penalize us with maybe -1 in the person who maybe let the team down. And then secondly, you have teams which are just good in teamwork and all that, but then again they don't bring in the content. So over there, you might want to maybe judge the debate as an average. It is average because at least they have the teamwork spirit, but then again, let it be average because the content is what we are taking to the nationals. In as much as we are looking at all that, we are taking content, because we don't want a scenario where you can have unity, but you're having unity in not saying logic things. So the debate could be average, maybe. If you're a judge who maybe loves people working in unity and not maybe taking the glory for themselves, maybe that is what you can do. Yeah. So that is the maybe one question that usually comes across. And with that, I hope I have tackled the objectives of judging criteria and speech evaluation in WSDC, in as much as I did not give a rubric order as to how I am going to tackle it. So with that said and done, in case anyone has a question, if we are in the same WhatsApp group, then I think you can text me. But regardless, my number is in case you want. Oh, sorry, 94. Let me just edit 794. So my username is just Perez in WhatsApp, so you can probably text me for clarity or anything if you think of a question, or you can probably post it in the group and I can answer at this juncture if nobody has a question at that point. And I hope that the aim of this particular call has been achieved. Thank you.
Congratulations, everyone, upon completion of this second session. So I'd like to say that on behalf of DIA and on my own behalf, Perez, we are very grateful. The session was, yeah, in my opinion, I think you've really covered it all, really. And also to the Chinese, yeah, for making it engaging. It is good when you guys ask the questions, because then when we do the evaluation test, you guys can notice and see where you stand. Right. So that's first said. The session was also being recorded. You guys can follow up later in case you wanna catch something again. Yeah. By this point, I'd like to appreciate you all for being around, and once again to Perez for making it a point to give us such insightful thoughts, and all. We are really utterly grateful. All right. So great session, guys. Have a great night. Have a good night. We sign out from here. Bye.